My first thoughts was that I'm being kidnapped because I'm British, they probably think I've got money. That quickly went because as soon as somebody lifted my hood in the car, I saw two white guys sitting there. And when they spoke with their American accents, they said, you can answer our questions here, or you can answer them in Guantanamo Bay. In 2001, I moved to Afghanistan, to Kabul, the city, with my wife and children. To pursue a project that I'd already started from the UK, which was to build a school for girls and wells in the drought-stricken regions of the northwest. When 9/11 happened, I heard from a friend who came knocking on the door saying America's been attacked. One of the things the Taliban did is that they banned TVs at that time, so there were no images that I saw. I remember seeing airplanes fly over, US airplanes, and they were dropping leaflets. It was a strange sight to see things fall from the sky from these airplanes. I'd never heard of the Twin Towers, never been to America in my life. But these leaflets were offering bounty money. Shortly after that, the cruise missile strikes hit Kabul, where I was.
Explosions, anti-aircraft fire has been heard, has been seen in Kabul, the capital. The Associated Press reporting that there is thunderous explosions and the rattle of anti-aircraft fire.
The places started to empty. People started to leave. But at the same time, the closer you got towards the border area, the more chaos there seemed to be of people trying to get across. And eventually I did get across into Pakistan. I remained there for a good few months, 2 to 3 months, until there was a knock on my door in the house where I was living in Islamabad, the capital. I opened the door and there's a bunch of people there standing. One of them puts a gun to my head and pushed me into the forecourt of the house. My wife and children are sleeping inside at this time. There's no identification, nobody's got any badges, nobody's in uniform. They throw me to the ground, tie my hands behind my back, tie my legs together, put a hood over my head, and carry me into the back of this vehicle. My first thoughts was that I'm being kidnapped because I'm British, they probably think I've got money. As soon as somebody lifted my hood in the car, I saw two white guys sitting there. It was clearly to me, these are the CIA. When they spoke with their American accents, they said, you can answer our questions here, or you can answer them in Guantanamo Bay.
See the all too familiar shots of hooded detainees being escorted to and from their cells.
The world's microscope has hovered over Guantanamo Bay and Camp Delta, where Al-Qaeda terrorists and others are being held.
So by this time, I'd seen Guantanamo was across the world screens. Everybody was clearly aware of what was happening in Guantanamo. It was headline news in the world. You saw people in these orange jumpsuits kneeling with face masks, ear defenders and blacked out goggles on their faces. I was taken to this airport, a military airport, hooded, so I didn't know exactly where we were going. I knew that there's others with me, and I could hear the sounds of prisoners moaning and shouting in agony as they're being processed. And so my hands were tied behind my back. I was seated flat on the floor of the aircraft. My legs were shackled. A cargo strap was put across my legs and behind my arms, and a hood placed over my head. I noticed or sensed that there's a prisoner next to me on the other side, and he's tried to speak to me. And when he did, an American soldier came and he said, if you speak again, I'll slit your throat. He put a knife right to my neck. From there, we flew from Pakistan back into Afghanistan to the Kandahar military airbase. They dragged me, two big, huge American soldiers, right through the cold. It was really cold at that time. It was in winter, mud. They sat on top of me, one pushing my head down with his knee, the other one with his knee in my back. And then they got a knife and sliced off my clothes, sliced off my trousers, sliced off my shirt. I could feel the blade gliding across my skin. And then paraded me naked in front of all of these soldiers, in front of all of these other prisoners who were also going through the same thing, like a conveyor belt. So by the time I'm taken, or told rather, that I'm going to be sent to Guantanamo, I'm more prepared for it than, say, other prisoners. They put on me what's known as the three-piece suit, which is a pair of shackles that are connected to a chain around your waist, and then from your waist another chains going down to your ankles. And so you can't move your arms in any direction at all. On top of that, they put a mask over my mouth, ear defenders very tightly, and goggles that were blacked out so I couldn't see anything. You couldn't see, hear, or even speak. I woke up in a daze, almost 2 days later. Just as I was recovering from the effects of the drugs they'd given me for the journey, I'm going through a gauntlet of soldiers being punched and kicked, spat upon, sworn at. The next point, they're forcing me down and shaving my beard, shaving my head off like a sheep. And then the next stage, they're throwing me on the floor. Dogs are coming, literally Alsatian, German shepherds, snarling in my face. Again, all to terrify me. And then I'm being photographed in this way. And photograph isn't just for identification purposes. These photographs are trophy pictures. They're photographing me in a state of terror. I was interrogated by the CIA and the FBI together. They hog-tied me, my hands behind my back. Again, punching, kicking was absolutely normal. And then brought pictures of my wife and children who had been in my house that night, who I still had no contact with. And they said, "Where do you think they are now? What do you think happened to your wife?" And while that's happening, there's the sound of a woman screaming in agony next door. And soldiers screaming at her, and she's screaming in agony. They brought a prisoner to the front of my cell, my communal cell at that time, and they tied his hands above his head to the top of the cage, which was customary practice for prisoners, and they left him like this, suspended, with a hood over his head for days on end. So the intent was to try to break me using this kind of psychological form of torture. They said to me that if you don't cooperate, we'll do to you what we did to a man called Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi. And al-Libi was said to be an Al-Qaeda leader who they tortured right there in the city, where I was sitting. They sent him to Egypt. In Egypt, he gave his infamous false confession that Saddam Hussein was working with Al-Qaeda to obtain weapons of mass destruction. That false confession was taken and given to Colin Powell, the Secretary of State of the United States of America, and he presented that to the UN Security Council as a justification to invade Iraq.
Saddam Hussein is determined to get his hands on a nuclear bomb. He is so determined that he has made repeated covert attempts to acquire high specification.
Of course, it turned out that Ibn al-Sheikh al-Libi was making up that story to stop them torturing him. What they did is produce a confession that they had written in their words, and they said that if you want to get out of Guantanamo, the only way you can do it is by signing this. If not, you could be taken to a court where the only people there is the US military, and you can be found guilty of conspiracy and you can be executed. And we have seen the gas chambers, they're already being built. That's what they told me. So I had absolutely nobody there else to speak to and didn't know what to do. So I went and made a prayer asking God, guide me here, I don't know what to do. So eventually that's why I signed, hoping that perhaps if I get to a court, they take me to a court, maybe there's media there, maybe I can expose all of this. But yeah, I signed. However, despite all of this, there were in the background Supreme Court rulings being made in favor of the Guantanamo prisoners, which essentially said that they do have the right to challenge their detention. And as a result of that, lawyers first started to come to Guantanamo about 2.5 years after it opened. And that's how I first met my lawyer, Clive Stafford Smith, who said that there's no amount of legal ramblings that's going to get you released from Guantanamo. We have to embarrass these people through the court of public opinion. And that's what had happened in the UK. My father had mounted a campaign with many organizations listing all of the names of the prisoners and their details. And that embarrassment started to reach Tony Blair's government and essentially say that you've been complicit in the abuse of your own citizens. And eventually I was told on just a couple of weeks before I was about to be released that I'm going to be released. There are no charges against me. And on the day that we were due to be released, I was put on a coach with blacked out windows with about 40 other soldiers, and there's 4 British prisoners, including me. They shackled us up and were taking us on about an hour-long journey to the other side of the island where the airport was. And I remember just laughing, saying that these guys think we're going to escape on our way to freedom. And we finally did arrive at the airport. The soldiers had forgotten the keys to the locks and the shackles. And so symbolically, as well as in real terms, they had to snap off our shackles with huge wire cutters. One of the results of the war on terrorism has been that the Western nations, Britain, America, and elsewhere, have done away with their principles. They've instituted, supported, justified torture, rendition, kidnap, invasion, killing, and countries like Britain have actually Guantanamoized their own legislation. So what they've done is introduce into Britain the concept, for example, of control orders, where people are held based upon, placed under house arrest based upon evidence that they cannot see, determined in special courts with special advocates in a Guantanamo-esque style. You've had the passing of anti-terror legislation every year, a new law, the likes of which we didn't even do at the height of the IRA campaign when over 3,000 people were killed. And this is something that you would never have associated Britain with before the beginning of the War on Terror.